So here are 5 reasons why you should never vaccinate your sheep. Number 1, you should never vaccinate someone's food. Now, you can vaccinate your dog, you can vaccinate your cat, you can vaccinate your horse, and that is entirely between you and your animal. But when you vaccinate a sheep, you are vaccinating an animal that is meant for someone else's food. Whatever is in the vaccine that you put into your sheep, it will ultimately be consumed by another human being. And so you have a greater responsibility about this. Vaccinating sheep is not just about protecting your own sheep from some disease. It is that you are affecting other people that may not be aware that you are vaccinating your sheep. The second reason is no ingredients are listed on sheep vaccines. It doesn't tell you what's really in these vaccines at all. It might have a warning or directions on how to dose it, but it really doesn't do anything except for maybe this precaution statement. And it warns you the animal can have a problem with anaphylactic shock, and so you should give it epinephrine to help it. And also that in case of human ingestion, to call a physician immediately. Do you really want that in your food? Really? And here's another one that warns you that it's for animal treatment only. But if you go down and look at the fine print, it'll tell you that it's using thimerosal. The fine print says 1 milligram per milliliter of thimerosal added to this vaccine. Now that's a preservative they put in this vaccine that's going to go into your food. So what is thimerosal? Thimerosal is an organic mercury compound that's being used in vaccines. This compound made out of mercury is being used as a preservative in vaccines because it kills bacteria, but supposedly it won't kill you. The Wikipedia article on thimerosal goes on to say that the Public Health Service and the American Academy of Pediatrics and vaccine manufacturers agree that thimerosal containing vaccines should be removed as soon as possible because they want to eliminate or reduce as soon as possible the mercury content of their vaccines. Yet they still leave it in as a preservative for your annual flu vaccines. So that they would ever get rid of it in sheep vaccines, why should they? And no sheep is ever going to complain about mercury poisoning from these vaccines. So if they get sick, that's just a sheep they get rid of. But mercury poisoning is something that builds up over time. And in humans, it causes muscle weakness, poor coordination, numbness in the hands and feet, anxiety, memory problems, a lot of things that we blame on old age. It could be coming from these vaccines that are being introduced into our food supply. Here's another sheep vaccine that's only available in Australia. It's called Barbervax. It's a new mRNA sheep vaccine to stop the barber pole worms. It uses proteins from the guts of a barber pole worm to produce antibodies in sheep to repel the barber pole worms in their intestines. But has this ever been tested on the people that eat lamb meat? What does it do to the humans that eat the meat? From what I understand about mRNA is that it actually makes you produce the vaccine yourself. It's a gene therapy. So when that gets into a human, what does it do? Does anybody ever test this? I don't believe so. Ultimately, it all comes down to money, with the cheapest vaccines possible being used for animals because nobody really cares. However, it does end up in your food supply, so it does end up in a human when you inject it into a sheep. The other reason not to vaccinate your sheep is that vaccinated lamb meat is not being labeled correctly in the store. The lamb meat in the store is not labeled to show these hidden ingredients, and so it's being mislabeled and it's deceptive. We have to assume that every meat that does not have the USDA organic certification has been pumped with these vaccines. Vaccines are a hidden additive to our food. It is wrong to sell meat that does not indicate what is in it. It should be clearly labeled contains mercury if there is mercury in these vaccines or some other warning. Reason number 4 is it is totally unnecessary to vaccinate St. Croix sheep. Now, a lot of these vaccines, they may apply to like these big commercial sheep breeders that aren't grass-fed if you're raising them on grain, but for grass-fed St. Croix sheep, you never need to vaccinate these sheep. And so I'm going to back up my statement with this list of sheep and goat vaccinations from James England. He is a doctor of veterinary medicine. He has a PhD, and he works with the University of Idaho. There's a lot of large sheep operations out there in Idaho, and so he represents a different viewpoint than what I have. And in this list, he says a lot of these vaccinations are optional, that they are based on either a disease problem, an environment, or some sort of special requirement. The first one is this vibriosis, and James England is telling you that there's other solutions that may be better. But this comes from brackish water where this bacteria grows, and the solution is to keep your sheep in a healthy area, not in brackish water. So no, you don't need to vaccinate for vibriosis. The next one is this caseous lymphadenitis, or CL. And James is telling us that the vaccine itself can lead to a false positive animal. And so really the vaccine is not the way to go. This is a very contagious disease. It makes a big abscess. I had this with my goats at one time. I had to get rid of all of them because I bought something from a sale barn. The real solution to CL is not to vaccinate, but to practice biosecurity. And whatever new animal you buy, it needs to be held in quarantine until you know that it's okay. James then tells us about blue tongue, and he tells you the vaccine doesn't even have the correct strain for the blue tongue virus that they have in Idaho. So there's no need to use that vaccine. And these last three diseases, the sore mouth, it can be prevented by biosecurity and not buying your animals from a sale barn where they're exposed to a lot of other sick animals. The chlamydosis is like a venereal disease for sheep. And the pasteurellosis is more like, they call it a shipping disease, when animals are kept together in a pen too closely. And all these diseases can be prevented by not buying from a sale barn. You don't need vaccines to prevent these diseases. Now, the vaccines that James recommends for the large sheep operations in Idaho and tells them that you have to have are the clostridial diseases for enterotoxemia and tetanus. And I'll tell you why we don't have to use that for St. Croix sheep. First of all, this Clostridium perfringens is it's everywhere. It's ever present in nature. It's also in the intestinal tracts of humans and all the other vertebrates. So your sheep already have this bacteria in their gut. It causes problems when you take sheep off pasture and you start feeding them nothing but grain, which is what these large sheep operations do. When the bacteria builds up, it produces something called enterotoxemia, and it creates these toxins inside the gut of the animal. It can also happen inside of a lamb. They're just a few weeks old. So how can a lamb that's just a few weeks old have a buildup of toxins from a bacteria that's naturally in its own gut? What is causing that to happen? Well, for one thing, these large commercial sheep operations, they have the lambs locked up in a barn, and they're feeding it nothing but grain. They're feeding the little lambs grain, and there's also feces that the lambs can be in contact with. So they're being exposed to something that's not natural. Now, if you let the lamb outdoors, you let the mamas give birth outdoors, and there's nothing but grass to eat, you're not going to have this problem with lamb dysentery. I've never had this problem with my lambs. This is something that only affects people that have lambs inside the barn, and it's a big commercial operation. They're going to have these kinds of problems. But if you let them lamb outside, it's not going to be a problem. So you don't need to vaccinate a lamb that's being lambed outside like it should be in nature. And so that's why you have lamb dysentery, because you put them in an unnatural environment, and as a result, you got to vaccinate them. That kind of goes along with the territory. The other reasons farmers have to vaccinate is because they feed them nothing but grain. They keep them in, and they fatten them up as quick as possible on grain, and that's what causes this problem with their gut. This same bacteria causes enterotoxemia. It's called overeating disease or pulpy kidney. And it's when an animal is exposed to rapid increase in dietary carbohydrates, which is grain, the bacteria explodes and causes a rise in the concentration of toxins. So it's feeding all this grain to fatten them up real quick. That's why you have to vaccinate them. If you don't feed them grain, You don't have to vaccinate them. It is that simple. Just do everything naturally and you don't have to vaccinate your sheep. The grain is what's changing their chemistry in their gut, so they have to be vaccinated to overcome this naturally occurring bacteria. The last reason to vaccinate is to stop tetanus, or this Clostridium tetani. And this really only affects sheep that are being castrated, or they're having their tails cut off or docked, or they're having their feet trimmed. And I don't do any of that. I've never even trimmed the hooves on my sheep, so there's no reason for that. But with these large wool sheep breeds being bred for profit, and they're always cutting on them or trimming something or cutting something off, well, yeah, I guess you need to vaccinate them for tetanus then. But with St. Croix sheep, you never need to dock their tails because they're a hair sheep. They don't have wool back there where they can have fly strike or some other problem. And you don't need to trim their hooves because they have really good hooves. I've never trimmed the hooves, which could cause tetanus. And I've never castrated them because when they get old enough, I'll just take them out of the herd or sell them or whatever I need to do. And so there's no reason to cut on these animals. Tetanus also occurs more like in a barn or some dirty place. And since I leave my sheep out on pasture and just put them in the barn just to catch them, but they really don't stay in the barn, they're not going to get exposed to tetanus and a lot of these other type of bacteria. The last reason not to vaccinate your sheep is that vaccines create sick genetics. If vaccines are really necessary to help a sick animal or to keep nature from culling an animal with these sick genetics, then we are breeding these vaccine-dependent sheep. We have to let nature cull the sick genetics out of our flocks. Those animals that are apt to have tetanus or overeat and need vaccines to survive, these need to be culled. And nature is doing its job when we let it function as it should. So none of my sheep require vaccines or other chemicals to live or survive, as I've let nature cull all of these sick genetics out of my flock. This has been going on for about 16 years now, and I rarely have one that gets sick. In the beginning, I have several. Every year I would lose. I lose 1 or 2 out of 100 now, maybe 4 or 5 out of 100, maybe 5% each year I lose to some problem. But I don't use chemicals. I never have to. Well, thanks for watching the video.